Gripping my swollen belly, I fought through another wave of pain, trying to focus on my breathing. The back seat of our car felt like a prison, confining me with my escalating fear and discomfort. Nathan, my husband, was driving, his face a blend of worry and urgency. "We're close, Laura," he reassured me, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. I wanted to believe him, to find solace in his words, but the pain was overwhelming. Suddenly his phone rang, shattering the tense silence. I watched Nathan's expression shift from concern to confusion, then to something I couldn't quite understand. "It's Vanessa," he said, his voice tense as he answered the call. My heart sank at the mention of his sister, a constant source of tension in our marriage. "What? Right now?" Nathan's tone was incredulous. "But Laura's in labor, Vanessa." I strained to hear more, but Vanessa's voice was just a shrill echo. A sense of dread washed over me, the pain of my contractions intensifying with my growing anxiety. Nathan hung up abruptly and pulled the car over. "Laura, I need to help Vanessa. She's stranded at the station. Her car's broken down. She's panicking." "But what about the hospital?" My voice was barely a whisper, laced with disbelief and fear. "I'm about to give birth, Nathan." "I know, but you can call an ambulance. They'll get you there faster. Vanessa's alone and she's freaking out," he insisted. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was he seriously choosing Vanessa over me, over our unborn child, at a moment like this? "Nathan, please." "I need you," I begged, my voice cracking under the weight of my emotions. He avoided my gaze, looking out of the window. "I'm sorry, Laura. I have to do this. Just call 911, okay? They'll take care of you." With shaky hands, I dialed the emergency number as he helped me out of the car. The cold air hit me, and I felt a chilling sense of abandonment. Watching Nathan drive away, I was alone, the ambulance's distant siren the only sign of incoming help. Tears mixed with the pain of my contractions, but it was the sting of betrayal that cut the deepest. How could he choose Vanessa over us at such a critical time? Lying in the ambulance, my mind raced with hurt and disbelief. The paramedics' voices faded into the background as I tried to comprehend Nathan's decision. He had left me at my most vulnerable for his sister. As the hospital came into view, one thing became clear. Something fundamental in our marriage had shifted. The pain of betrayal was as sharp as the labor pains, marking the start of a journey I never expected to take. Lying in the hospital bed, cradling my newborn son, I should have been overwhelmed with joy. But the memory of Nathan's betrayal lingered like a dark cloud. Holding my baby, I couldn't help but reflect on the past, the signs I had ignored about Nathan and his family, particularly Vanessa. Vanessa had always been the center of attention in their family. I remember our wedding day vividly. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, but Vanessa managed to turn it into a spectacle about herself. She arrived in a flamboyant white dress, stealing the spotlight, her smug smile indicating she relished every moment of it. "Isn't white usually reserved for the bride?" I had whispered to Nathan, trying to hide my irritation. Nathan had just shrugged, a passive response that had become all too familiar. "That's just how Vanessa is. Don't let it get to you." But it did get to me. Her behavior at our wedding was just a preview of the years to come. Whenever there was an opportunity to overshadow or undermine me, Vanessa seized it, with Nathan either oblivious or indifferent. I thought back to the countless family dinners where Vanessa would dominate the conversation, turning every topic back to herself. Nathan's parents watched passively, never intervening. I used to wonder if they were intimidated by her or simply chose to turn a blind eye. "Vanessa, maybe Laura has something she'd like to share," I once suggested during a dinner where Vanessa was ranting about her latest job drama. Vanessa had shot me a withering look. "Oh, please, what could possibly be more interesting than my disastrous day?" Nathan had chuckled, dismissing my attempt to redirect the conversation. "Let her talk, Laura. You know how she loves the drama." I used to think Nathan was just being a protective brother, but as time went on, his lack of support became more apparent. It wasn't just about being protective, it was about choosing Vanessa over me, every time. Now, as I looked down at my son, I realized how much I had tolerated, all in the name of keeping peace. Nathan's abandonment at the hospital was not just a singular act of betrayal, it was the culmination of years of being second to his sister. A knock on the hospital room door snapped me back to the present. It was my parents. their faces etched with concern and love. As they cooed over their grandson, I felt a surge of strength. I wasn't alone. I had my son, and I had my family who truly cared. "This is just the beginning, Laura," my dad said, his hand gently squeezing mine. "You're stronger than you know." As they left, promising to come back with anything I needed, I made a decision. I wouldn't let Nathan and Vanessa dictate my life any longer. It was time for them to face the consequences of their actions. My son needed a mother who could stand up for herself, and I was determined to be just that. A few months before the birth of my son, I was supervising a field trip to the local science museum with my second-grade class. It was a responsibility I always took seriously, ensuring each child's safety and enjoyment. As I ushered the excited children towards the planetarium, my phone vibrated incessantly in my bag. An unknown number flashed on the screen. I silenced it, not wanting any distractions. After the show, as the kids explored the exhibits with the museum staff, I finally checked my phone. The unknown number had left several missed calls, eventually replaced by Nathan's number. My heart sank. Had something happened? Stepping aside, I called Nathan back, only to be greeted by his frantic voice. "Laura, where have you been? I've been trying to reach you." "I'm on a field trip, Nathan. What's wrong?" I replied, anxiety building in my voice. "It's Vanessa," he said hurriedly. "There's a surprise concert by her favorite idol at the park, and they're selling limited edition autographed photos. You need to get her one." I was stunned. "Nathan, I'm working. I can't just leave." "You don't understand, Laura. She's really upset. You're close by. Just go and get it," he pressed. The audacity of his request left me speechless. Here I was, responsible for 20 children, and Nathan expected me to abandon them for a frivolous errand? "Nathan, no, I'm not leaving. I have a duty here," I said firmly. There was a pause on the other end. "You're being selfish, Laura. This means a lot to Vanessa." His words stung, but I stood my ground. "No, Nathan, my students come first." He hung up abruptly, his last words echoing in my mind. The rest of the field trip passed in a blur. I was there physically, but mentally I was grappling with the realization of how little Nathan respected my career and responsibilities. When I returned home, the house was eerily silent. Nathan was nowhere to be found. There was a note on the kitchen table, "Gone to my parents' house." That night, as I lay in bed, alone, my mind raced. Nathan's demand was not just unreasonable, it was disrespectful. It was a clear message that Vanessa's whims were more important than my professional obligations. That incident was a turning point for me, a moment when the veil lifted, and I saw Nathan's true priorities. As I drifted off to sleep, I knew things had to change. I couldn't continue living in the shadow of Vanessa's needs and Nathan's inability to see beyond them. I had to stand up for myself, for my dignity. Little did I know that this resolve would soon be tested in the most unimaginable way. The confrontation at Nathan's parents' house a few weeks later marked the tipping point for me. I had walked the 15 minutes there, still processing Nathan's abrupt departure from our home. As I entered, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Nathan, Vanessa, and their parents were all there, their expressions ranging from apologetic to expectant. Nathan was the first to break the silence. "Laura, you need to apologize to Vanessa." I was taken aback. "Apologize? For what?" Vanessa's voice was sharp, laced with self-pity. "Because of your selfishness, I missed out on the limited edition autographed photo. Do you have any idea how important that was to me?" I stared at her in disbelief. "Vanessa, I was working. I had responsibilities." Vanessa sniffled dramatically, turning to Nathan and their parents for support. "See? She doesn't even care. She ruined my day." Nathan's mother chimed in softly. "Laura, maybe you could just apologize to keep the peace." I felt a surge of frustration. This wasn't about keeping the peace. It was about constantly catering to Vanessa's unreasonable demands. Before I could respond, Vanessa thrust her phone at me, displaying a listing on a flea market app. "Fine, then buy this for me. It's the same photo, only $300. I was stunned. $300 for a photo? Just because I didn't abandon my job for her whims? Nathan nudged me. "Just do it, Laura. It'll make things right." That moment, something inside me snapped. The years of being overshadowed, of having my feelings and career disregarded, boiled to the surface. "No, Nathan, I won't do it," I said, my voice steady despite the anger coursing through me. Vanessa gasped. "But you owe me." I owe you nothing. I've put up with this far too long, I declared, turning to Nathan. And you're supposed to be my partner, but all you ever do is put Vanessa first. Where does that leave me? Where does that leave us? Nathan looked stunned, a mix of confusion and defensiveness in his eyes. But she's my sister. That's no excuse, I cut him off. Your sister, your family's antics. I'm done being a part of this drama. With that, I walked out, leaving them in stunned silence. The cool evening air felt refreshing against my flushed cheeks. It was a walk of defiance, a statement that I was no longer going to be a pawn in their dysfunctional family dynamic. That night, as I lay in my bed, alone yet empowered, I realized that my marriage to Nathan was a shadow of what it should be. It was time for me to reclaim my life, my dignity, and if that meant going against Nathan and his family, so be it. The road ahead would be challenging, but I was ready to face it head-on. The discovery of my second pregnancy a few weeks later brought a complex mix of emotions. Joy, fear, and a resolute determination to protect this new life from the toxic environment Nathan and his family created. It was during a routine morning, the nausea hitting harder than usual, that the test confirmed my suspicions. I was pregnant. I remember sitting on the bathroom floor, the positive test in my hand, a whirlwind of thoughts swirling through my mind. How would Nathan react? Could I bring another child into this chaos? When I eventually broke the news to Nathan, his reaction was lukewarm, his mind seemingly elsewhere. "That's great, I guess," he said, distractedly scrolling through his phone. I couldn't help but notice Vanessa's name flash across his screen. In the months that followed, Nathan's indifference only grew. He was rarely home, always at his parents' house or running errands for Vanessa. I was left alone, wrestling with the reality of my situation. One evening, as I sat in the living room, surrounded by pregnancy books and ultrasound pictures, Nathan walked in, his expression tense. "We need to talk," he said, sitting across from me. I braced myself, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "What is it?" "It's about the baby," he began, avoiding eye contact. "Vanessa thinks we should move in with my parents, for extra help." I stared at him, incredulous. "Move in with your parents?" "Nathan, this is our family. We should be making decisions together, not based on what Vanessa wants." Nathan sighed, a hint of frustration in his voice. "You just don't understand, Laura. Vanessa knows best. She's been through a lot." "That's not a good enough reason," I argued. "Our child needs a stable environment, not more of Vanessa's drama." Nathan stood up, his frustration boiling over. "You're being unreasonable, Laura. Vanessa is just trying to help." I shook my head, a sad realization dawning on me. "No, Nathan. You're the one being unreasonable. You're so caught up in Vanessa's world that you can't see what's right in front of you." He didn't respond, storming out of the room instead. That night, as I lay in bed, the distance between Nathan and me felt like a chasm. I knew then that I had to make a decision for the sake of my children and me. In the following weeks, I grew more resolute. I started preparing for a life where Nathan's influence was minimal. I couldn't let Vanessa's shadow loom over my children's lives. I needed to be strong, for them and for myself. The day my water broke started like any other, but it quickly turned into the most harrowing experience of my life. As the labor pains began, Nathan scrambled to get me to the hospital. In that moment, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he would be there for me when it mattered most. We were halfway to the hospital when Nathan's phone rang. His sister's ringtone. "Don't answer it," I pleaded through gritted teeth, another contraction rippling through me. Nathan hesitated, but ultimately picked up the call. "Hello? Vanessa? What's wrong?" I couldn't believe it. Here I was about to give birth, and he was still prioritizing her. "Sis can't get to her favorite band's concert because of a train incident," he said after a moment, his tone changing. "I need to help her." "Nathan, I'm in labor," I screamed, disbelief and fear mingling in my voice. "I know, but this is important to Vanessa. You can call an ambulance, right?" he said, his voice distressingly calm. I was in shock, unable to process what was happening. "You're choosing her over our baby?" "It's not like that, Laura. Just call 911, Nathan said, pulling over and helping me out of the car, my hospital bag in hand. As he drove off, leaving me alone on the side of the road, I felt a mixture of abandonment, rage, and utter disbelief. How could he do this to me, to his child? Somehow I managed to call an ambulance and get to the hospital. The nurses rushed me into delivery, their faces a blur as I grappled with the pain and shock. Hours later, I held my newborn son, a beautiful, innocent life, unaware of the drama surrounding his arrival. As I looked down at him, my heart swelled with love and a fierce protective instinct. Nathan's betrayal was unforgivable, a clear sign that he would always choose Vanessa over our family. As I lay in the hospital bed, a plan began to form in my mind. Nathan and Vanessa would not get away with this. They needed to face consequences for their actions. I would make sure of it. That night, as my son slept peacefully beside me, I made a vow. I would fight for what was right for my children and me. Nathan and Vanessa had pushed me too far, and it was time for them to understand the gravity of their actions. In the weeks following the birth of my son, my resolve to hold Nathan and Vanessa accountable only strengthened. Their callous disregard for our family could not go unchallenged. I started by seeking legal counsel, determined to divorce Nathan and ensure he faced the consequences of his actions. During my first meeting with the lawyer, I laid out everything: Nathan's financial irresponsibility, his emotional neglect, and the final act of abandonment. The lawyer listened intently, his expression growing more incredulous by the minute. "This is more than just a case of marital discord," he said, shaking his head. "This is abandonment of a spouse in a vulnerable state. We can take this to court." I nodded, feeling a sense of empowerment. It was time Nathan and Vanessa understood the weight of their actions. Meanwhile, Nathan's behavior worsened. He showed up at the hospital, feigning concern, but I saw right through it. It was a performance, likely for the benefit of his parents or Vanessa. "Laura, please, let's talk about this," he pleaded, his eyes darting around nervously. "There's nothing to talk about, Nathan. You made your choice," I replied coldly, holding my son protectively. "But Vanessa needed me. You don't understand the pressure she's under," he tried to explain, but I cut him off. "The only pressure here was on me and our newborn son when you abandoned us. I'm filing for divorce, Nathan. You and Vanessa will have to answer for what you've done." Nathan's face paled. "You can't do this, Laura. Think about our family." "Our family?" I laughed bitterly. "You stopped thinking about our family a long time ago." After that encounter, I instructed the hospital staff not to let Nathan or anyone from his family visit. My parents supported me, their disappointment in Nathan palpable. The legal proceedings were grueling but necessary. I presented evidence of Nathan's neglect and abandonment. The court was sympathetic to my case, especially considering the circumstances of his betrayal. The judge granted me a favorable divorce settlement, including full custody of our children and significant alimony and child support. Nathan's face during the verdict was a mix of shock and realization, the reality of his actions finally sinking in. Vanessa, who had accompanied Nathan to court, looked outraged. "This isn't fair. You're ruining our family," she exclaimed. "This is the result of your actions, Vanessa," I said, facing her directly. "You and Nathan have only yourselves to blame." Walking out of the courtroom, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had stood up for myself and my children, ensuring that Nathan and Vanessa faced the consequences of their selfishness. It was a hard-won victory, but a necessary step towards rebuilding our lives. With the divorce finalized and Nathan's betrayal squarely behind me, I began to rebuild my life with my children. It was a time of transformation, shedding the remnants of a broken marriage and embracing my new role as a single mother. I returned to teaching, finding solace and purpose in my work. The support of my colleagues and the joy of my students were balm to my soul. My parents were invaluable, helping with the kids while I worked. Their unwavering support made the transition smoother than I had dared to hope. But life wasn't without its challenges. Nathan, seemingly unable to accept the reality of our divorce, attempted to reach out multiple times. His messages ranged from pleading to angrily accusing me of tearing our family apart. Each message was a reminder of the man he had become, a stranger driven by selfishness and manipulation. I maintained a strict no-contact policy, focusing instead on providing a stable, loving home for my children. They were too young to understand the complexities of what had transpired, but they adapted to our new life with a resilience that filled me with pride. One afternoon, as I picked up my son from daycare, his teacher pulled me aside. "Laura, there's a man outside asking about you. He says he's your husband." My heart sank. Nathan. Despite everything, he still wouldn't let go. I instructed the teacher to not let him in and to call the police if he didn't leave. As I drove home, my son chatting happily in the back seat, I realized the lengths I would go to protect my children from Nathan's toxic influence. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, the shadow of Nathan and Vanessa began to fade from our lives. I found strength in my independence, a sense of peace in the life I was rebuilding. But revenge, as it turns out, wasn't as sweet as I had imagined. It was exhausting, a constant drain on my emotions and energy. The satisfaction of seeing Nathan and Vanessa face consequences was overshadowed by the need to move on, to leave the bitterness behind. So I chose to let go, to focus on the present and the future. My children deserved a mother who was present, not one consumed by the past. We had a whole life ahead of us, full of possibilities and new beginnings. As I tucked my son into bed that night, his little arms wrapped around my neck, I knew I had made the right decision. Our journey hadn't been easy, but it had brought us to a place of love, stability, and hope, and that was worth more than any revenge. Revenge.